Welcome to another episode of Because That's What Heroes Do. In this series, Megan Dougherty and I take a look at all things MCU, and we begin a short series exploring the limited series WandaVision. I know you'll enjoy it. Megan, I was very confused when I watched this first episode. I thought I was a child watching I Love Lucy, or more appropriately, the Dick Van Dyke Show on television. What did you think or even feel when you watched the first episode, not in a rewatch and not having gone through and seen all the subsequent episodes, but how did you feel in that first episode?
Well, thinking back to when I watched it for the very first time, from the opening of the kind of the Marvel bumper at the beginning where everything's in color and you've got your normal comic book images rushing past you, but they're slowly fading to black and white until you land on the Welcome to WandaVision opening screen. And then, as you say, it was I Love Lucy and Dick Van Dyke, which obviously I didn't get to see when they were live, but the reruns of which, or more properly the VHS tapes of which, featured prominently in my childhood. And I loved it. I thought it was absolutely charming. It felt like one of the special episodes on a sitcom that you watch where, all of a sudden it's a musical episode or it's a film noir style episode, and it felt like a treat with these characters doing this interesting new thing. And I thought they were adorable. The chemistry was really good. The writing was really good. The sets were gorgeous. So I really liked the first episode, and I would have been happy if they had just done like a variety show season of different sitcom formats. Obviously, that's not the direction that they went in, but I thought it was a ton of fun.
To pick up on your last point, I thought this series was just going to be a comedic series where they looked at, or they parodied different sitcoms. I have to say I was very confused. For some reason, I never liked TV sitcom laugh tracks. And this one featured that right up front. And so I immediately took a dislike. I knew I was going to have to hang in there because there was some payoff at the end, but I have to say I was really confused. I was confused when they were at home. I was a little less confused when Vision goes to work, but I wondered, what the heck was Westview? Did you have that same question, or did you have, perhaps being Canadian, greater insight than we heathen Americans?
I didn't have greater insight, but I was probably much more willing to suspend my disbelief. I was just like, oh, Westview, the town where they live now. Fantastic. I can't wait to get to know about it. And of course, it's going to feature really prominently over the rest of the series. But I had been wondering if, from a comic perspective, does Westview have any significance, or was it just maybe a screenwriting type decision?
Or maybe a decision in Wanda's head decision.
Or maybe a decision in Wanda's head. Yeah, that could be true. That could be true, because there was a lot within these episodes, these tiny little signs, these little Easter eggs and cookies all throughout the episodes, indicating what we are to learn later.
And that was the thing that struck me in rewatching and preparing for this podcast, was the heart, for instance. I immediately thought, at some significant date, it must be their anniversary, and that turned out to be correct. But it also was when it all started. And that became so clear at the end. The series itself takes place, I think, 3 weeks after the end of Endgame, where Vision dies. And this is part of the grieving process of Wanda. And of course she would start when they got married, even though they were never married before. Although I think we can safely say they were a thing, or an item, or at least a couple. That heart turned out to be, I think, a great way to start. What did you think about, there was a couple of delicious cookies around Vision at work. So you want to tease us with those?
Oh, you tell me the ones of Vision at work. I was really focused on the ads. Those were the ones that I liked the most. What did you see about Vision at work?
At work, there was a clock. I think it was a clock that said Stark Industries. And in the MCU world, you can't get any more cookie than Stark Industries. Only I almost thought he must work for Howard. And Howard's going to stroll in.
Well, that's a good point you bring up, though, because it's pretty clearly not in the standard MCU reality.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a very different reality. And now looking back on it, Wanda had always had great power in the MCU, or the universe. She sometimes couldn't control that power. But it also made me understand, when I finally did suspend my belief, that there's a whole lot more power going on here than we understood. And she may not even understand that power. I went in and out of, does she understand what she's doing here? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. But there was clearly a portending of huge power in the mind of Wanda.
Yeah, huge power in terms of the ability to manipulate the foundations of reality itself, but also the emotional power and the power of those feelings of grief and loss and eventually responsibility. I really like this series. And go ahead.
I misspoke. It wasn't a clock. It was a toaster. And so
The Toastmaid.
the Toastade. So the Stark Industries going domestic, or at least into home products. I thought the comedic scene where Vision chews gum was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was from episode 2 when they're preparing for the talent show, and they did that wonderful animation of the gum getting stuck in his inner gears. That was delightful.
But when he was at work in his first episode, you really got this clear message. He was a human computer, or he's a sentient computer, or he's a something computer. I thought he was at an actuarial office to start with because he was working. My grandfather had one of those machines, and I remember going to the office and playing with a hand crank. Very cool. But the whole setup where he inadvertently invites his boss over for dinner led to, I thought, a huge comedic scene and a true homage to the Bewitched or other sitcom where the husband brings boss and boss's wife home for dinner unexpectedly, and wife has to just throw something together offhandedly in only a few hours. That's perfect. How did that scene play out for you?
I loved so much about it from the morning when they were talking about it, and this was actually one of the parts of the whole show that hit me the most is when we're just getting to know them and they're trying to figure out what is this date, and Wanda's moving the plate along, hits Vision over the head with it and says, "My husband and his indestructible head." How's that for a slap on the face for what we know has just happened weeks or months ago? That when you think about it, I didn't get it the first time I watched it. The second time I watched it, oh no, not an indestructible head, not that, don't say that. So there's a lot clearly going on right beneath the surface. But when the boss and his wife finally arrive, I agree, it was completely hilarious that Wanda had mistaken it for their wedding anniversary and was wearing her lingerie. Gorgeous 1950s lingerie. That was absolutely delightful. And then Vision trying to amuse his guests while Wanda's frantically trying to make dinner, which is plainly ill-equipped to handle. Thankfully, she had some help, though, and I think that might bring us to our next topic of conversation, the neighbor.
Agnes is in a hugely long tradition of irritating neighbors in sitcoms. Know-it-all, be-it-all, busybody, never leaves, always shows up at the most inopportune times, and continually runs her mouth. So,
can we have 3 cheers for Catherine Hahn, though? Because how good was she?
And she became
phenomenal,
great in this series, and we're going to talk about her at length later because of either multiple roles she fulfilled or the role. I'm not quite sure if it's one or more, but she was great, and she introduced herself as that classic appendage, the nosy, busybody neighbor next door. And of course, it's always a woman because this is, of course, it's the 60s. But
who hates her husband, Ralph, which I think is also a common.
Yes.
My useless husband.
Yes, my useless husband. When I first saw this, the end of episode 1, where he pretends to perform a Heimlich maneuver, but actually does something a little more invasive to dislodge the food stuff that's stuck in his boss's throat and he can't breathe, I found that really interesting from perhaps a different angle. Obviously, we have Vision using his superpowers and causing a question to arise, but it also struck me as it showed the complete shallowness of the boss. And with one act of kindness or bravery or chivalry or courtesy or just plain being neighborly, it turned the whole relationship around. And it turned the relationship around for the boss's wife as well. And that seemed to me to be a theme that I saw a lot growing up. And so I was wondering, did that part of that scene have any sort of impact for yourself?
I was a little more focused on the boss's wife, on Mrs. Hart, because while they were sitting there and the boss is choking and Wanda's saying, "Vision, help him," after being basically begged by Mrs. Hart, she's like, "Make it stop." It plays on the shallow, on the surface level, very much a gag, but it was actually quite intense and grim when you were looking at how she was begging Wanda, not Vision, who was bent over the husband, but Wanda to make the change. And I think that was a really interesting clue about what was actually going on. And in terms of how it altered the relationship between the characters, I think that it's exactly as you say, it was nostalgic. It is how they did things in old sitcoms, and it is an idealized version of how the world could be that our leading lady wants very much.
We have Vision saved it. We have the boss basically say, "You're my guy now because you've saved my life."
Unlike poor Norm.
Poor Norm. And the ending, though, I got a real sense of unease because it became clear somebody was watching. And I understood that, yes, that's probably part of this story arc. But it's still, I got the real sense that there was a whole lot more going on. We didn't get too much information about who or what was watching. But did you get that sort of sense of either unease or somebody was watching at the end?
Definitely the unease. Because again, like very top level, light, fluffy, fun sitcom, but like it was actually quite dark and often quite grim. And you could tell there's a lot going on beneath the surface. So I don't know I don't remember if I really felt someone was watching, but I definitely felt like it wasn't going to continue on exactly as it seemed to be. By the end of the episode.
I talked about the cookie that I enjoyed the most. Did you see any that you enjoyed or really struck you?
Yes, I think it was from the second episode. And this was a little throwaway. But on the printed wallpaper in WandaVision's second home in their more 60s style sitcom, it looked like it was the Hydra Lab. Instead of some beautiful villa in Italy, it was the Hydra Lab from Sokovia on the wall of the house, which I thought was weird and frightening. And I think also in the second episode is where we had the ad for the Strucker watch by Hydra, which was another really good one. And what I liked about that, or what I thought was interesting about that, was how the ticking of the second hand sped up and it got faster and faster and faster, which is then exactly what was going to happen with the pregnancy that was revealed at the end of the show and features quite strongly in many women's nightmares.
Or as we say in America, no, you don't control your own body. Sorry. The start...
Just an aside on that, you remember I went to Catholic school. And of course, there's the story of the Immaculate Conception. This was not explained well to Catholic school children in Canada in the 90s. And so we were all terrified we were just going to wake up pregnant. Until I think it was not till middle school that they actually explained the mechanics. So.
The technical old-fashioned way?
The technical... Yeah, that brought back a little memory for me. Just like, oh no, poor thing. It happened.
I hope you'll join Megan and I again next week where we take up WandaVision Episode 2.